G'day groovers, rockers, and in between. This is Vinyl Vibes. I'm your host, Jack Hodgins. Today, we are talking with founding member of Jay and the Americans, Sandy Deanne. Jay and the Americans were formed in 1960 after being signed by the famous Lieber Stoller team. It would take the group some time to get a hit, but in 1962 they would have their first major hit record with She Cried. The group would go on to have more hits throughout the 60s, such as Only in America, Cara Mia, and This Magic Moment. More recently, the group's song Come a Little Bit Closer was featured on the soundtrack to the 2017 movie Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, bringing their music to a whole new audience. After disbanding in 1973, the band would go on hiatus till in 2006 the band reformed and today are still performing. G'day Sandy, and welcome to Vinyl Vibes.
Hey, how are you?
Very well, very well. Let's start off at the beginning, Sandy. So you grew up in Brooklyn, New York. What was that part of New York like growing up?
Well, all of the people that lived there all knew each other. The kids all played on the streets together, and the grown-ups watched out for everybody's children. It was like a big group of people living in apartment buildings, and it was a very, very nice neighborhood, very safe, very upscale, and we had a lovely childhood, actually.
You got into music at a young age. What are some of your earliest memories of music?
We were lucky because we had a vast array of radio stations that played all different kinds of music. We had one station that played Broadway shows. We had one station that played Latin music. We had a station that played even country and western. And then we had a pop station, and we had a jazz station. And it was really interesting. You know, most people kind of kept to their own ethnicity, as you say, but we kind of flipped the dial around. And I think that had, you know, when you're young and you hear all different types of music, you absorb all of that stuff, and it gives you a strong background when you decide to do your own music.
And I've read, Sandy, that a big influence on you was your older sister and how she started singing. And so, could you tell me a little bit about that? Yeah.
Well, I remember being very little and my mother dragging me by the hand for all of my sister's professional lessons. She was a professional singer. She sang and she danced and she did modern interpretive dancing and she played the piano, and all the music that my sister played in the house was a big influence on me. The Pied Pipers, where Frank Sinatra is one of the singers. So I was exposed to a lot of stuff through her. My parents my mother dragged me along because she could leave me home alone. And I would go to all these lessons and see all this stuff going on. And I was fascinated with the career that my sister was pursuing. And then she, of course, got married, gave it up, and I wanted to continue. I had the urge. My parents didn't want me to have anything to do with the music career, you know, because they wanted me to be a doctor, a professional. And, of course, you never listened to your parents. You did what you wanted to. I found like-minded kids that loved the music, and we used to listen to AM radio and all the songs that played. You know, we would try to imitate the records on the radio. We would stand on the corner and snap our fingers and sing harmonies. And then by the time that I was a teenager, I was pretty good. I saw Elvis on television and ran out and got a guitar and started playing. And then I started my first group when I was 16 in high school. We became the local band.
What was that moment like for you? Because a lot of people have described seeing Elvis or hearing Elvis as like this wow moment. Yeah, like what was that like for you?
Well, for us seeing Elvis on television was like the next generation seeing the Beatles. You know, it had that impact. It was just such a shocking change from everything that was going on. You know, the groups that we knew about were the Four Freshmen and the Four Coins, and you know, they were very clean cut and pop-oriented music groups that was what was being played. And all of a sudden, there was this guy, you know, doing things that we never heard. I mean, he was a poor kid that grew up in a black neighborhood. So he took his roots and put it in his music. And boy, that opened everybody's eyes. You know, the parents were up in arms. They were screaming it's the devil's music. And the kids were loving it. You know, so It was very dynamic to see how later on all of the grown-ups kind of flipped over and accepted, you know, Elvis and became after him.
Yeah, and I mean, like at the time, what did your parents think of Elvis? Were they up in arms? Were they okay with him? Like, yeah.
Well, my father thought it was nonsense, and my mother loved. She thought it was cool. I had a very hip mother.
Yeah, okay.
What can I tell you? She liked Bobby Darin. She liked Frank Sinatra. She liked Perry Como, but she liked. I remember that she liked Elvis. She thought he was very cool. She also liked. She was pretty good about it. You know, she had a good eye and a good ear. Yeah. I guess I got it from her.
When you formed your own group, I've read that was like one of the requirements was that everyone had to have a white jacket.
Had to have a white jacket. That's right. Well, you did your homework.
I did.
So 6 people had white jackets. So everybody was in the group, and then we had to weed out the ones that really weren't that good. Wound up becoming a trio, and the trio was named the Harborlites. And we had a record on Jay Reincke organization, opened a label in the United States called Jarrow. And it was released on Jarrow. And I wrote the song, both sides actually. But it was played on the radio, and that was it. I was definitely hooked at that point when I heard myself singing, playing on the radio.
Yeah, and was that song, Is That Too Much to Ask? Was that the song you're talking about?
That's the song. That was the one that got the airplay.
Yeah.
Is that too much to it? Yeah.
Because you were pretty young then. I mean, that would have been so cool hearing yourself on the radio, I bet.
Oh, my gosh. We were screaming and yelling. We just couldn't believe that we actually were being played on the radio. And all our friends heard it. I mean, you know, we became local celebrities at that point. And, you know, when things like that happen, it makes such a strong impression on your young mind. And we were just doing it. We weren't doing it to be famous. We were doing it to show off for our friends and because we loved singing music and creating music. It wasn't like money-driven. We never dreamt that we would have a career. We never dreamt that we would make a living at it. And it was just, you know, that kind of thing. It was for the love, you know, like that movie, The Love of the Game, where they were playing baseball in a field. That's the kind of thing it was. And then all of a sudden, things evolved, you know, like there's an expression, man makes plans and God laughs. And that's kind of what happened. It just kept evolving, and we kept going, and we kept getting better and better. And one of the things that happened was when we formed that second group, we were signed by very big, important people who were at the top of the food chain in the music business, called Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. And they had famous people in their office that they worked with Elvis. They wrote Hound Dog. They wrote Kansas City. They wrote Rudy Baby. Everything. They wrote all the Drifter songs, and they wrote all the Coasters songs. So they were big successes, and they liked us. And we couldn't believe it. It was like a dream, you know, that these people who were so accomplished were even paying attention to us. And when we started recording with them, and then we started doing shows, we would go out and do the shows, and the people would stand and at standing ovations and clap and yell, and we would come off and go, "We fooled them again," because we couldn't believe that we were good enough. You know, the people in the entertainment business aren't as brave and sure of themselves as people think they are. You know, there's a lot of insecurity that goes on being a live performer, and you wonder, will we ever have another hit record? And you wonder the audience. And every time you get those applause, people went off stage for years saying, "Gosh, we fooled them again. Why are they screaming and yelling like that? It's with us." And then finally, after 15 years, we kind of believed that, you know, we must be pretty good. But it took that long for us to believe that we really deserved what was going on.
You mentioned there that audition for Lieber and Stoller. I mean, how did you score such a big audition with such big-name people?
We just knew a guy who knew them, vaguely knew them. He was a songwriter. He wrote children's songs. He had a publishing company, and he knew enough of the business to say to us, "Listen, I wrote these songs, I want you to learn them, and if you learn them and practice them, I'm going to get you an audition with Lieber and Stoller." And that was it. We would have followed him off of a cliff to get an audition with Lieber and Stoller. So we learned his song, and we went and did the audition for Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. They hated his songs, but they loved us. You know, that's just how things work. You know, we wound up singing 3 of his songs, which they didn't like at all, but they loved the first Jay Traynor's voice. They loved our harmonies. And we sang an a cappella song. The last thing we sang, old a cappella song by a very old doo-wop group called the Five Keys, called Wisdom of a Fool. No music, no accompaniment, just a cappella. And we sang that song, and their eyes lit up, and they went, wow, that was terrific. And they signed us.
Jay Traynor had joined by then. I mean, how did he join the group?
He was singing for another group called the Mystics. They had a hit record called Hushabye. And their lead singer had to have been replaced. So he auditioned and got that job. And that group was managed, the Mystics were managed by the same group as the Harborlites. So we heard Jay singing when we would do shows. There was the Mystics and the Harborlites. And he was unhappy being in the group because he was a substitute guy and they never treated him kind of equally, So he was, even though it was a successful group, he was miserable being with them because they never really accepted him as a full member of the group. And we sensed that vulnerability in him, and we loved his voice. We went, wow, that guy's really good. Why don't we try and form a group with him? And that's what we did, and that's how it happened. And then we recorded Tonight from West Side Story. And then the follow-up to that was She Cried. And that broke internationally.
Because I've read that Lieber and Stoller gave the group the name, Jay and the Americans. I mean, what did you think of the name at first when they kind of said, this is what you're going to be called?
Vinky Jones and the Americans is the original name they wanted to give us. It was kind of like a coaster song, like Yakety Yak. It was a funny thing. It was kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke for them. Very sarcastic in the way they approached things. And we pleaded with them. We said, listen, in all good conscience, we can't go through life being called Binky Jones and the Americans. It's just too much of a silly name.
Yeah.
And then we convinced them to use Jay's nickname, Jay Traynor. So they kind of acquiesced. And whenever we were with Jay Traynor from then on, we always called him Binky, and he hated it.
First release, which was Tonight from West Side Story. Take me through how that single kind of came to be.
Well, Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller made a deal with United Artists. And United Artists was releasing the film version of the West Side Story show. It was the first film. Now, not the new one out 60 years later, but at the time, it was 1961. They were releasing West Side Story as a movie, and they wanted to have a teenage act do a teen version of a song from West Side Story to go with their release of the movie as a promotional thing. So Jerry and Mike had us do Tonight, and it became a territorial hit in New York. Sold about 60,000 copies, 45 records, And in those days, that was a decent amount of records for just the Northeast alone. So because of that, they decided to invest more money and give us a second chance.
And then the band, of course, released She Cried. That was the first hit the band had. And I've read that that took 6 months, though, to become a hit. There was some, record announcer in a radio station that would just keep playing it over and over again. Can you tell me about that?
In those days, they had the A-side and the B-side,
Yeah.
And the A-side was called Dawning. And that was a pop version of the classical music Peer Gynt Suite by Debussy. And Jerry and Mike wrote lyrics to Debussy's Peer Gynt Suite and named the song Dawning. And they loved it, and it was a very hip little record, and it was kind of cool. And UA thought that would be the hit. So they released the single. Actually, at the first pressing, didn't have She Cried on it. The original promotional record just had Dawning on both sides. There was no B-side. And they put it out there, and it started to get a little airplay. And then it started to die. But then they put a pressing out that had She Cried on the B-side. And a disc jockey in California got that promo record. He flipped it over, and he just went absolutely crazy in love with She Cried. And it was a very unusual record. The song was unusual. The sound of it was kind of very different because it was kind of like very drony and monotonous, but yet there was a charm to it. And it was the first song, I believe, where a love song where a guy told a girl goodbye instead of the girl breaking the guy's heart. And I think that's what captured the kids when they heard the lyrics. because it was a guy saying, when I told her I was saying goodbye, she cried. And that was unique. And this guy just kept playing this record. He closed the door to the studio, and he must have played it for 6 hours. And the phones lit up all over his station, and people wanted to buy the record. So UA was forced to press the record with She Cried. But it worked its way slowly from California to the Midwest, to Chicago, and then from Chicago into New York. So because it never was number one in those three places simultaneously, it never became number one nationally. It only went to number three. Had it been released originally all over the state, it probably would have hit number one. But anyway, it was a number three record in the States, and it was a number one record all over the world, in a lot of places. It did very well in England. It did very well in Australia, I think.
And that must have been such a great moment for you and the rest of the band.
We were already going in the studio to record some new stuff. The record company had said that this is the last session, that if something doesn't hit, because according to them, Dawning bombed. It was, 4 or 5 months and nothing was going on. So they said, okay, this is the last chunk of money we're going to invest in you guys. So you better make this a good session. And we were rehearsing all this new stuff to go in and make a new record. And our manager came running into the room, Danny Kessler, ran into me and said, stop what we're doing. We have a hit. And I said, how can we have a hit? The record's been out for 6 months and nobody knows who we are. No. Somebody flipped it over and She Cried is breaking all over the country. And sure enough, it just kept climbing and climbing. So they threw us in the studio, Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, and had us record a quick album to go with the She Cried record. And the songs were all songs that Jerry and Mike had written, which happened to have been great songs, but they were covers of all the Drifters records and stuff that they had written. Actually, Jay Traynor shined doing those records. A great song is a great song, and we did some nice versions.
And how long did that album take? Because I'd imagine they wanted to get it out pretty quickly.
Big rush. Yeah, it was a big rush. So we got that album done, I would say, in about less than a month. Big session, strings and horns and a lot of musicians and everything, but, we had the best arrangers and session players on it, and Jerry and Mike were wizards in the studios.
Do you look back on those days in the studio, like the old tape machines, really fondly?
Absolutely. I got to tell you, to this day, there's nothing like an acetate recording. There's nothing like a real vinyl record. When I hear records now and they're squashed down in the streaming, it loses a lot of the magic, Even the solid state stuff doesn't sound the same. It doesn't have the warmth to it that the tube things have, It's a different feeling. And the audiophiles know. And vinyl is kind of trying to make a big comeback. And we're even thinking of maybe doing our next an EP as a vinyl record just for the heck of it.
Yeah, the vinyl records are making a big comeback. Are Jay and the Americans records on, are there new repressings of them available, or I
have no idea. I haven't tried to find them in years.
Okay.
I have my copies, and but I don't listen to. It's funny. I don't listen to our music unless we're going to do it in a show. Then I will go back and refer to the record because I know that the fans want to hear the record as close to authentic as possible. So we try and recreate that. But other than that, when we would finish a record, we either loved it or didn't love it, or we thought it really was great. And then we'd move on. It was the next thing. So I don't, I get embarrassed when my family pulls stuff out. I go somewhere and people recognize me for whatever reason and start playing that stuff. And it's like embarrassing. It's kind of like me walking down the room blowing the trumpet. You know what I'm saying? I feel about it. I love music. I listen to all the new people. There's some great artists out there now that carry the torch. Ed Sheeran blows my mind. I think he's fantastic. I listen to the new stuff. I appreciate the growth in music, and I'm proud to have been part of the stuff that these kids listen to, maybe, and took a little something from, like I took from the people that came before me.
Yeah.
That's a good feeling.
And it's really interesting when we like how everything's interconnected, in the music world. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. We were were influenced also by people that we played with. You know, we played with, one of the biggest moments for us was touring with Roy Orbison. And he had a big influence on us because he was such a brilliant songwriter and singer. And we actually had a hit record where we re-recorded his Crying, and it went top 20 in the States. And Jay Black, did a fabulous job on it. We loved Roy Orbison stuff. I listened to him a lot. But going forward, like I said, right now Ed Sheeran is my number one pick. I also, I'm very eclectic, you know. I listen to Latin music. I like the Chainsmokers are really cool.
Yeah.
You know, I listen to a lot of stuff. You know, I listen to the new stuff, and I'm very hopeful that the music business is in good hands. You know,
bringing it back to your release, She Cried, and now it's a big hit. That would have been pretty good for the group. Now playing more shows. What was that period like for the band?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting because you know what, we knew how to sing songs that other people had done because that's how we learned how to be a group. And we had people writing songs for us. See, there was only one guy in the group that really was a songwriter, and that was Marty. And his songs just didn't fit us for some reason. You know, he was more of a country guy, and we weren't a country group.
Mm-hmm.
We would rely on other people to write the songs. We'd have to find songs that fit our eclectic taste because our group was very strange. If you notice, all of our hits, from the very first song we recorded, which was a Broadway tune Tonight, to She Cried, which was just a unique record by itself, to Only in America, which sounded like it also came out of West Side Story. And then we did Cara Mia, which is totally different from any other record that was out before. And then we did Come a Little Bit Closer, which was very different from all our other records. And then we did Let's Lock the Door and Throw Away the Key, which was like a totally different record. That was like a real teeny bopper kind of bubblegummy record. And then we did Some Enchanted Evening from a Broadway show. And then we had a hit with Sunday and Me, which was Neil Diamond's first record that he wrote before his career started. It was his first hit for him.
Yeah, right.
And, you know, and then we did This Magic Moment, which was a remake of a Drifters record that I produced on an album I produced, and that became our biggest hit. And then we did Walking in the Rain by the Ronettes. And all of those records, none of those records sound similar to the other one. When we were making music, a lot of the groups, all of their stuff sounded like the same record sideways over and over. And whether it was by choice or whether it was the record company tended to insist, well, we just had a hit with this. Let's write it sideways and put it out and they'll have another hit. And that formula worked for a lot of people, and we refused to do that.
Yeah.
We like changing it up. We like expanding our horizons musically with arrangements and different instruments, and we constantly were changing. And that was the fun for us. That's what we enjoyed.
Jay Traynor left. I mean, I can imagine. Did you think...
Panic. It was complete panic. Here we had a hit record in the hit group. You know, we had struggled so hard to do it. We got lucky. And then the next three records that we put out bombed. With Jerry and Mike, with Lieber and Stoller. And one of those records, I got to tell you, I really believed in my heart was a big hit. The follow-up to She Cried was called This Is It. It was a great record. It was a little similar to the other record. Maybe that was what it was, but it was a great recording. And it never happened. I was very discouraged after that. And we all got discouraged because the next two records also didn't do anything. Usually in those days, if you had a hit, the follow-up usually made a lot of noise, at least. And we got nothing. And so everybody got, you know, kind of disgruntled. But we still thought we were going to pull it off. And then Jay quit the group. So we went, wow. Well, you know what? We're still with Lieber and Stoller. We still have a contract. Let's find a new Jay. And Marty sang with this next-door neighbor of his named David Blatt, who became Jay Black later. He changed his name. And they had a duo together. They were like the Poor Man's Everly Brothers. They used to perform together, the Two Chaps, they were called. And actually, they used to sing Cara Mia in their act. So he came to audition, and he sang Cara Mia. And everybody went crazy. I went, oh, my, I never heard a pop guy sing like that. It was like opera. So we said, okay, Dave, you're now Jay. And he went, okay. And it took us 5 years to convince somebody to let us record Cara Mia. Because every time we did a live show and sang that, people were screaming and throwing hats, and they went wild because they had never heard anything from a pop rock and roll group like that. Yeah. But the record company was very, they had blinders on. They were very focused on what everybody else was doing. We were not that. We didn't want to do what everybody else was doing. We finally had enough hits in a row to force them to let us record that song.
That's an amazing story looking back now, because we all know how big that song was and just how great it is. Why do you think
but they released the flip side. They put that on the B-side of another song, and they were pushing, again, like they did with She Cried. They're pushing the other side. And thank God, Sammy Davis Jr., who loved our group, was co-hosting, he's substitute hosting the Johnny Carson show, the Tonight Show. And he got us on because they didn't have rock acts on the show. So he forced them to have, he said, I'm hosting, this is who I want on as my guest. And if not for that, we would never done the Tonight Show. And if not for that, instead of handing out the music to Doc Severinsen for the flip side of the record, we handed out Cara Mia. And the record company didn't know that was going to happen. We just did it because we said, nuts, we're going to do it. And we did it on the Tonight Show. And all the people all over the United States heard that song and started calling NBC, where do I buy that record? And that's why that record broke.
That would have to probably be one of your favorite Jay and the Americans songs, surely.
No, actually, no. Everybody in the group has their own favorite song. Actually, that song it kind of took over from everything else. It took over from the shine on all of our other hits because it became so important, that it kind of eclipsed. And that's why we went after Cara Mia, it was, we had Some Enchanted Evening, which did a little less, and then it dwindled down again, and we had to find a new approach to the music because everybody wanted that. So it kind of hurt the group for a few years that we wouldn't do that again. I mean, where do you find that again? That's a once in a lifetime kind of song. That's kind of like Good Vibrations.
Yeah.
How do you top that? Finally, we took over our own recordings, and I started producing the group, and we did an album called Sands of Time, which we all picked songs that we loved, that other people that we loved had recorded, and wished that we had recorded that record, that song. And on that list of songs was This Magic Moment, which is just a fabulous song. And when that album came out, that was the song that jumped right off the album, came as our biggest hit record. So wherever we go, the three most requested songs are This Magic Moment, Cara Mia, and actually then it's Walking in the Rain and She Cried and Come a Little Bit Closer. So those are the ones. Those are the ones that we have to do every show.
That's a really interesting point you mentioned with Cara Mia and the Beach Boys songs, Good Vibrations. It's kind of like having these fantastic songs that are like just wow. I mean, it's both a blessing and a curse almost, because how do you top that?
How do you follow that?
Yeah.
How do you follow that? It's like Mick Jagger said it when he saw James Brown. We got to follow him. How do you follow him?
Yes. Taking it back a few years prior to the release of This Magic Moment, I've read that you guys were the support act for the Beatles when they did their first US concert. What was that like for you guys?
Yeah. Oh, that was nuts. We drove up to the place. It was the dead of winter, and it was Washington, D.C. There was snow all over the place. We pull up, and the marquee says The Beatles and Others. And we already had a couple hit records, and we were really annoyed. We got ticked off, I mean, we saw all the newsreels. They hadn't really hit that huge yet, but all of the news stations, the TV stations were playing the girls screaming or fainting and, getting off the plane and waving. And everybody was jumping on the bandwagon. But we felt we were established. We at least should have had our name on the marquee. I'm sure the Righteous Brothers who were on the show felt the same way,
Yeah.
Sure that Tommy Rowe felt the same way. Jay said, let's turn the car around and go home. I said, no, I'm the businessman. I said, no, we can't do that. We signed the contract.
Yeah.
But that was our first instinct, like nuts to this. I can see where this is going to go. So we went there, and when we got there, because of all of this publicity on the Beatles, we walked in, the place was packed, and we only held about 6,000 people, 7,000 people, the arena. And it was jammed. The arena was an ice hockey arena. We used to hold prize fights there. And all of the dressing rooms were downstairs, and it was an enclosed venue. So all the noise from upstairs you could hear reverberating, you know. It was like kind of leaking its way downstairs into the dressing rooms, because the dressing rooms were where the hockey players got changed, you know. And we were down there, and all we kept hearing was the kids chanting, "We want the Beatles, we want the Beatles." And finally, I forget which girls group it was that went on, and they wouldn't tolerate them. They were making a lot of noise while they were trying to sing. And then Tommy Rowe went on, and he wasn't getting much attention. Then we went on, and by now the kids are screaming, "We want the Beatles, we want the Beatles." And Jay, who was very glib, Jay Black had a very quick wit, and we walked out on stage, and he went, "Hey, wow, I'm glad you guys all came to see us tonight." And they all started laughing, and then they shut up and listened. And we sang our 2 songs and got a standing ovation and left, and went back downstairs to the dressing room. And while we were getting changed out of our stage clothes, we heard them saying, "Man, here they are, the Beatles." And a scream went up. I've never heard anything like this ever again. It's like, you know, when you see the needle pin in the studio in the red?
Yeah.
It just kept on going, and it never stopped. It went on for about 5 minutes, the
right.
screaming and the screaming. And we all held our ears and looked at each other. And I remember Kenny saying to me, "Something just happened." And we said that for the rest of our careers. We were there when something just happened. And that was it, man. They blew the doors. I mean, that was insanity. It was just like, you know, like Elvis all over again.
Did you end up getting to meet the Beatles, or?
We actually saw them at their press conference. You know, we didn't know what they were about. We just knew, "I want to hold your hand, and she loves you," right? And you know, we were saying, well, they're a garage band, but they're good, because their records were they were looking to make very simple records. We didn't realize those were records they had made 2 years before, and they had moved on to better things already. And they were accomplished as musicians, but it didn't show in those 2 songs, because they were pretty simple songs, you know?
Yeah.
So we were sitting there, you know, trying to make our minds up. And then we heard them do the press conference. And when the reporters were saying, "Oh, hey, well, how did you find America? How do you find America?" And Ringo says, "We made a left at Greenland." And I fell out of the chair. I went, "These guys are a lot hipper than we think they are. These guys got more going on than we're giving them credit for."
Yeah.
And they proved it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. They were not just a publicity stunt.
What was your feeling like American groups and how they felt towards like the British groups? Because, you know, we had that
We hated it because we couldn't get airplay.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we were one of the few groups, you know, we felt, listen, there was no denying that the Beatles and the Stones and like even Herman's Hermits, they were legit. They deserved getting airplay. But there were people getting airplay just because they had a British accent. And we couldn't, you know, all of a sudden the American charts was nothing but British records. And all of the groups that were out there that had struggled to make a career here were being, you know, swarmed upon and drowning because we couldn't get airplay. But all of a sudden, there were 3 groups that really blasted through that British invasion. 4. I would say it was the Beach Boys, Frankie Valli, and the Four Seasons. We had, actually, we were one of those 4 groups. We had come a little bit closer, was like number 3, and the other 9 records on the top 10 were British. You know, I mean, we struggled hard to have our hits in the 60s, and we did. You know, so we shouldn't complain, but it was a lot harder than it should have been.
Yeah.
You know, and that was, you know, the American acts were very disgruntled. It was like, you know, I mean, the Beau Brummels made believe they were British to have a hit record.
And you mentioned the song Come a Little Bit Closer then, and more recently the song was featured on the soundtrack to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Because of that...
Yeah, thank God for the movies.
Yeah, how did you feel about that in that moment, getting your song on such like a massive production?
Wow, I said, well, wow, thank you, James Gunn. That was fabulous. You know, he was a music fan. He had a group in the 60s, and he made that soundtrack of the songs that he loved when he was doing his band. You know, music is infectious. You know, It seeps into your bloodstream and you can't get rid of it. We call it brainworms. You know, you hear a song and all of a sudden you get a brainworm.
Do you see a lot of younger people now attending concerts because it was featured in the movie?
Yeah, we've got a whole new audience. I'd say there's only two kinds of music, good and bad. I don't care what the genre is. There's good and bad music in all genres of music, you know. I mean, you know, people attempt and some of it isn't very good. And then there are the ones that are really good, like Ed Sheeran doesn't miss. I mean, this guy, dangerous. He's great. I'm just so impressed with what he does musically, you know. And it's my style. It's the kind of style that I appreciate the most. And he also changes it up a lot.
Yeah.
He goes from love songs to dance songs to silly songs, serious songs, you know, to autobiographical songs. And he's got it all going on. And he lays all the tracks down himself, which is brilliant.
What's next for the band, do you reckon? Like, have we got any upcoming tours?
Well, staying alive is staying alive is the biggest part of the next step for the band, because we're all, you know, we're not kids anymore.
Yeah.
Just being healthy enough to go out and do live concerts, which we love doing, but it gets harder. You know, I mean, not the show. The show is the fun part, and we'll always be able to go on stage and sing some songs and perform. It's the traveling to the gigs and traveling home, and that wears you down. You know, at our age, we can't do those tours like we used to do. You know, we need time in between the concerts.
Yep. Yeah,
So that's a big trick. Just staying healthy as you age. Someday you'll know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, Sandy, I want to really thank you for your time today. We spoke about some really, really cool things, and so, just thank you so much for making the time.
Well, thank you for having me, and I hope we gain some fans in Australia. And the sad thing is we always wanted to go there and perform, and it never happened, and maybe someday it still will. We're still here.
That was founding member of Jay and the Americans, Sandy Dean. To keep up to date with the band, head to their website at jayandtheamericans.net. Remember to share this show with other music fans. And if you really enjoyed this episode, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Vinyl Vibes. And to all you music lovers out there, stay groovy.